Welcome to my philosophy channel. In this channel, you're probably going to see a lot of texts, a lot of courses, and this is just a new beginning for me. So in this video, we are going to read this book, which is 100 years old now. It's called The Philosophy of Hegel, written by W.T. Stace. This is a quite classic book, but I think it's very important and also quite helpful for beginners to enter the realm of, true philosophy, I would call it. And the reason why the author had written this book actually is writing the preface. But for one thing, I do recognize that for this book, since it's pretty old or whatever, it only has PDF version, which is a scanned version. So it's not very clear, especially not very clear to be viewed on a screen, or especially on a smartphone screen. Yeah. So it's not super suited for making philosophical video, especially considering the difficulty for a philosophical text. Even though I would say this book is quite simple. If you're ninth grade, by that I mean if you're a high school student and your first language is English, or you're a college student and your second language is English, so this book shouldn't be a big deal for you. It's like way much easier than reading Hegel's original text or Hegel's English translated text. And this is why this book I call it fundamental, because it's a stepping stone. But I do recognize the limitation of this PDF format. So, thanks to an open sourced OCR technology, OCR software, that I'm able to transform the entire text in just like 1 minute into a Word version, a Word format, making this text a lot easier to read, a lot easier to be viewed on a smartphone screen. I presume that might be your primary source for watching my video. I'm technically just doing this for you, for your own convenience. So for today's course, I'm going to walk you through the preface of this book, explaining why the author had written the book, why he thought it was important to write this book roughly in the 1920s, and why this book is still quite important for you nowadays. I know this could be dry, but I would presume this is not intrinsically very difficult, even if English is not your first language. So basically, the primary object of this book is to place in the hands of the philosophical student, which means you, a complete exposition of the system of Hegel in a single volume. So the first sentence is quite self-explanatory. I guess I don't need to explain it. However, I want to point out that there are debates and there are arguments criticizing this book, saying it's an oversimplification of Hegel's philosophical system. I do recognize the existence of that kind of argument or criticism. However, this is a philosophy for beginner. I think this book is good enough for beginner to start their own philosophical endeavor. And when you get started, when you feel more comfortable with reading this kind of philosophical text, you are more than welcome to jump right into Hegel's translated book, the Cambridge version of the Phenomenology of Spirit, which is a very good book. I also plan to teach in this channel as well, but it will take some time to do all the work, record the video, etc., etc. So yeah, you can expect that. Anyway, so let's move on. So no book with a similar purpose, so far as I know. Just remind you, this is talking about 100 years ago. Now we have a lot of similar books introducing Hegel from different perspectives, I would say. But this book is still quite helpful, especially when you are a pure beginner. Exists in our language. There are several books which expound in more or less detail in the logic. There are several books dealing with special aspects of Hegel, his ethics, his aesthetics, and so on. There are a number of books which set forth the general principles of his philosophy without entering upon the detailed deductions. If we reflect on the text just a little bit, we will actually realize that this is still kind of like the case in the current philosophical arena as well. I mean, like later states will tell you that in his time, the philosophy departments in universities only teach students about Kant. And I think they are still more or less still doing the same thing, even today. So yeah, I think his observation still reflects some truth, some reality about philosophical teaching in the contemporary world. And that's why I think the book still has value. If you're still debating with yourself whether you want to read the book or not, this is one of my answers. And there are many books of criticism. Yeah, this is still the case. The English reader, even by studying all these expository or critical books, cannot get a complete and connected view of the system. This is still the case, actually. I won't explain further. If you go to college and you take some philosophical courses, introductory level courses, or taking philosophy as a minor, like I did, you probably would recognize this as well. And if, as doing expositors and commentators, he turns to the writings of Hegel himself, he is faced with the task of mastering at least 10 or 12 appallingly difficult volumes before he can get any adequate idea of the whole doctrine. This is the case, but not necessarily. I mean, if you're smart enough and you go to read Hegel's Cambridge version English text, you still can be quite adequate with the doctrine. I think what stays here is referring to doing academic level work, like PhD level philosophical work or beyond. I think he's talking about at this level. But for ordinary folks, if you're just interested in philosophy, you want to study philosophy to improve your thinking skills, for example, or to improve your English, or improve the way you express yourself, you want to have more sophisticated expression of your innermost soul, I think reading 2 or 3 volumes of Hegel's original text in the English translation would serve this aim. This is my advice. Yeah, and even then, of course, he has read nothing like the whole of Hegel's works. Yeah, that's why I would always advise jumping to Hegel's own work as soon as possible. As soon as you're ready, you need to jump into it. But this is a topic that I will address later on. We need to focus on the preface of the book right now. So the present volume contains, in part 1, an explanation of general principles, and the subsequent parts it sets forth the detailed deductions of the entire system with the expectation of the philosophy of nature, of which only a short general account is given. This exception is justified by special reasons which are stated in their appropriate place. Again, I think this is still quite self-explanatory. This is basically explaining the basic agenda of this book. So what they amount to is that no ordinary student requires knowledge of the detail of the philosophy of nature, which are out of date and valueless. However, I do have doubt about this statement, but for beginners, just don't worry about it. We can just move on with ease. The position of Hegelian studies at our universities, critical attacks on even contemporary education. I would say especially on contemporary education. Arguably, our education is not necessarily better than what it was 100 years ago, if that's some news to you. I think if you ever went to college, or if you have friends or family members ever went to college, they will probably tell you the same thing. Yeah. So seems to me very unsatisfactory. Yeah, it is. The student who has taken an honors degree in philosophy usually has a very considerable knowledge of Kant based upon actual study of Kant's writings, but he has little knowledge of Hegel beyond general ideas picked up in lectures. Yes, I would argue this is still the case, or I don't even need to argue for that. So this is not to be wondered at, for the undergraduate's time is insufficient to carry him through any considerable portion of Hegel's works. Yeah, I would say if you want to be very serious and study Hegel's own work, reading the Phenomenology of Spirit probably would take you about a year or so. And then if you want to move to his logic, the whole logical system, that will probably take you another 2 years. And that really account for most of the time you can spend in college. So I guess that's why even today's university also cannot be any better than they did 100 years ago, I guess. Yeah. And there exists no book giving a satisfactory exposition of the whole system in a reasonable compass. If the present book can remedy this state of affairs, its existence will at least have been justified. Again, I will remind you again that this book is still a very elementary, very fundamental book for you to jump into the real philosophy. But this book is good enough. I would argue it's good enough. It's better than if you want to read Kant's original text for a few years and learn nothing that of importance. I would argue, because I'm a Hegelian philosopher. So yeah, that's my position.